Hey, everybody. So I'm happy to bring you this chapel talk today on a topic that you might not put these two things together, but I guess, of course, you would expect me to by now. So, obviously, I want to talk a little bit about Minecraft and prayer, more about how Minecraft, specifically for me, became a form of prayer, especially in the early days of the pandemic. Now, I want to remind us that we are still smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. Um, it feels differently now, right, than it did in March, even though nationwide the numbers are looking very much what they did in the worst months of this pandemic. But nevertheless, we all remember those early weeks in particular. Things felt very anxious and very stressful and very strange. And so, one of the things that I was doing at the time was incorporating Minecraft into my classes for the church architecture project, which some of y'all remember. And so, I want to talk a little bit about that with y'all today. Um, when I think about Minecraft and prayer, this phrase comes to me, which is from the tradition of the Benedictine monks, the monks who followed in the way of Saint Benedict. Ora et labora, from Latin, and in English that means pray and work. So these are the two things that you do in the monastery. You pray and you work. And I know most people think of monasteries, places where monks live, as totally outside the norm. I've always been fascinated by monasteries. Maybe in another life I was a monk. Um, but the thing that it interests me, I guess, so much about them is the way that they think about time, in particular, in the monastery. Um, because there's nothing really to do, other than pray and work. So, the monks do things. They often raise livestock, or they make honey or beer or other products. They sell them, some monks, borrow the monastic car, and you need to go to the store or whatever. So, they don't live lives that are totally closed off from everything. Um, but they live a different sort of existence than we do, and it's one that's often really fascinated me. So pray and work, and the idea behind this is that prayer is a form of work, and that work is a form of prayer. And so that in any activity that you engage in for God's glory becomes a form of prayer, right? So that anything. Writing an essay can be a form of prayer. Um, Playing a sport can be a form of prayer. And yes, even playing Minecraft can be a form of prayer. And I'll explain that more here in just a minute. What you see here is what is called a cloister walk. So the cloister is a part of a monastery, usually in a square. And it usually looks something like this. It's designed like this. And here, let me get out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. So that's the cloister walk, right? And one of the many things that this affords the monks who are living in the monastery is obviously a place to walk. It's protected from the elements somewhat. Okay, it's kind of like a hallway, and so but it's a place that a lot of monks will walk and pray at the same time, right? So that prayer again takes many different forms. You find prayer uh, sort of suffusing the life of everything you do in the monastery. So you can take a walk and pray just as easily, or maybe sometimes more easily than staying in your room or even praying in the church that the monks share. And so one of my favorite authors, Kathleen Norris, wrote this book about her experience being what's called an oblat in a monastery. So that's when the monks just kind of let you come and hang out for an indeterminate amount of time. You can live there. You take what are called minor vows. So you don't become a monk, but you just kind of hang out with the monks and you pray and you kind of see and experience a little bit of the way that they live. And she did this and wrote a book about it, obviously. So she says this in the book: in our culture, time can seem like an enemy. It chews us up and spits us out with appalling ease. But the monastic perspective welcomes time as a gift from God and seeks to put it to good use rather than allowing us to be used up by it. This is something that I thought about a lot in those early days of the pandemic. And y'all have heard me get on this soapbox before. But the way that we treat time, the busyness with which we live our lives, I think it's soul sucking. I think it takes a lot away from our humanity and God's design for the way that we're meant to operate. And so personally, I found those first few weeks, especially, to be rather refreshing. Because I didn't feel that time pressure bearing down on me all the time. And so this is the conclusion of the quote that kind of follows from that idea. You never really finish anything in life. And that's a good monastic perspective right there, right? You never really finish anything in life. And while that's humbling and frustrating, it's all right. The Benedictines, more than any other people I know, insist that there is time in each day for prayer, for work, for study, and for play. That we can find time, and so that the monks have their days divided, right, with a rigid schedule. Okay, that's what the word rule means. The monks follow a rule or regula. It's where we get our word ruler, right? So they do follow a schedule, but within that schedule, you find freedom, right? Rather than feeling bound to the clock, rather than feeling bound by time. So believe it or not, right? That is a feeling that I have had when playing Minecraft. There's my music. It was supposed to go behind the screen, but oh well, that's okay. What appealed to me about this game from the very beginning was the music, right? Which is playing in the background now that you can hear. I had never really heard any video game music like this before, and I've played a lot of video games in my time. The music is meant to, I think, deliberately evoke, the sense of calm and peace, but also even mystery that you might encounter when playing the game. I typically play Minecraft in creative mode, and what appeals to me about it is the absolute freedom that you experience in that mode, right? And also the sense of the timelessness of it all. You don't even know when Minecraft is really supposed to be taking place, right? There's no like historical time period. There's obviously different materials that you can use that came into prominence at different times in human history, but it feels timeless. And then the notion of your creativity basically having no boundaries at all, that you can create almost anything that you can think of. It's a blank canvas. It's the kind of thing, frankly, that when I was a kid, I would have absolutely loved. I played with Legos a lot. I did like early Sim City games. I loved to design worlds. And so encountering Minecraft as an adult has connected me with that part of myself, which I had probably left behind for a long time, frankly. So where I'd like to go from here is play for you a video that I just recorded that talks a little bit more about what I did during the pandemic, which was continue to craft and refine and work on a monastery. Okay, so I'm going to play that now, and then I'll come back and say a few more things after this is done. So this is the world that I created that reflects a lot of the Benedictine values that I just talked about, but also, of course, that I got to actually experience those values as I was creating this. So that for me, especially during those early pandemic days, this became a form of prayer, believe it or not, to work on this project. So I'll give you a brief tour of some of the things that I did here, and we'll start over here. This is, of course, the graveyard, right? The monk talks about always having one's death before one's eyes. The monks are acutely aware of the finitude of life, and so they bury their brothers here and visit their graves often. And most monks are buried in a very simple way with no embalming procedures. They're just wrapped in a white linen shroud and put into the earth. And so that's the idea. Hello, pig. Pigs like graveyards too, I guess. So this is the church that I built. So got a little Episcopal shield flag there. Okay. Most monastic churches are not quite this grand, but I wanted to build this one with a sense of scale, right? It's important to think about the fact that churches, like all religious institutional structures, are built to reflect the grandeur and the glory of God. And so the size, the scale of the church is important to me to try to keep that sense of awe. Okay. I have back here the baptismal font. Sorry, that's a holy water font right there. This is the baptismal pool. So someone can be baptized here. Go. Have your pews, you have your organ over there, and then of course as you approach the altar, I have the bread and the wine here, the altar rails, the places from which you would proclaim the gospel and the epistle. So everything's in good order here. This is the tabernacle here, where you would typically find the rest of the bread and the wine. Back here, we have what's called the sacristy. We actually have one of these here on our campus. It's the little room right behind the chapel, and it typically holds the vestments that the priest and others will wear. Out here, we have what's called the cloister walk. So I just showed you this in the presentation a few minutes ago. I love that idea of using the cloister walk for contemplation. And so that's something that I built into my church also. I can tell it's bothering some of you that I didn't close this door, so I'm going to go close this door. There we go. So through this door, we have what's called the scriptorium. The monks are dedicated to the preservation of texts, not just biblical texts, but really texts of all kinds, literature, stories, etc. were copied by monks in rooms that looked very much like this. So this is the scriptorium where the monks might work. And here's the library where they would store all of their manuscripts. The word manuscript comes from the Latin word manus, which means hand, right? So the idea of writing these things out by hand. Here we go. Down here, we have the working farm, right? So as I said before, this is characteristic of Benedictine monastic life. So they have an irrigation system here at a farm. A little working farm here with a couple of livestock. And then, of course, you got to have bees. There's some honey waiting for me right there. Crops are ready to harvest, obviously. Okay, I'm going to drop myself back down right here. here's another little cloister walk that leads from the church to what's called the refectory. And the refectory is the dining hall for the monks. And so typically while they're eating, somebody stands up here and reads either the Bible or some other kind of literature to the monks as they dine. And then here's a library where the monks can also sit and enjoy. Down here I have some living quarters for the monks. So these are called cells, monastic cells. So they're very simple, and typically a monk just needs a bed, a chest, and a few books. So that's all that I've included here. This is a work in progress, but this is meant to represent a winery where the monks would create wine or beer. Also, some monks brew for some of their work. Out here, I built the monks a lake. And then as part of that lake, they have a canal. The canal leads all the way down here to the river. And so they can use boats to come all the way out here to the river to sell their wares, which again, monks historically did to help the monastery survive and thrive. The last thing that I never finished, but that I was still working on when the summer came along and I started going back to work, but this is called the guest house. And so a lot of monks support their monasteries with a guest house, much like a hotel, right? And so I've got that. I guess I did more on it than I remembered. Here are the guest rooms, and there's an upstairs as well that I'm still working on. But that's the guest house there. So that's a little bit of this working monastery that I poured quite a few pandemic hours into, a project that I really, really enjoyed, as I was saying. So one of the things I'll add about this is I laid every single block of this, by hand, right? So those of you who play Minecraft know there's all sorts of different ways, especially if you have the Java edition, or you can use the fill command. There's ways to build things kind of all at once. But it was important to me as part of sort of that monastic discipline of quiet contemplation and prayer to lay each block of this place by hand. Because that becomes a sort of a form of contemplation, right? Because as y'all know, if you've done this before, it can be quite repetitive. But kind of the repetitive action is the Zen part of it, right? It's the part that is meant to be relaxing, that sort of clears your mind. And so that was part of the attraction of this for me as well. Where I want to go with this now is just show you two videos from a monk of the Carthusian order, and he lives in a monastery in the Alps in France. This monk is blind, and he is old. And this is from a 3-hour film called Into Great Silence, which is all about this monastery. Which also, by the way, captures this sense of calm and peace in the monastic life really, really well. Highly recommend it. But anyway, he says a couple of things here that really get at what appeals to me about this whole way of life. And it's something I try to capture honestly in my my monastic Minecraft world. So I'm going to close with these two thoughts from our friend here, this monk.
Le passé et le présent, c'est humain, ça. En Dieu, il n'y a pas de passé. Il y a uniquement universellement le présent. Et quand il nous voit, il voit toute notre vie déjà. Et c'est pour ça qu'il, comme il est un être infiniment bon, il cherche toujours notre bien. Et dans tout ce qui nous arrive, eh bien, il n'y a pas à s'inquiéter. Nous devons toujours partir du principe que Dieu est infiniment bon et tout ce qu'il fait, c'est pour notre bien. C'est pour ça qu'on doit toujours être heureux. Un chrétien ne devrait jamais être triste. Parce que tout ce qui lui arrive est voulu par Dieu, ou au moins permis par Dieu, et pour le bien de son âme. Et bien alors, c'est essentiel pour nous, n'est-ce pas ça? Dieu qui est infiniment bon, tout puissant, et qui nous aide. Il n'y a qu'à faire ça, et puis on est heureux. Nous devons toujours partir du principe que
I can't really add to or improve on those thoughts, except to say that I want you to think about this guy who lives in this very simple monastic cell in the middle of the Alps, and has, I hope you can tell just from his speech, he's blind, but he's incredibly content. He's incredibly happy. Where does that happiness and that contentment come from? Where could it possibly come from? And for this monk, you can see that the peace comes from God and his belief that God is all powerful, all good, standing outside of time, viewing our entire lives with goodness and grace. So that's what I wanted to share with y'all today. I'll see you later and hope you have a blessed day.